The Dog Who Faced the Darkness, a chilling true story of loyalty and sacrifice. Before you decide this is just another ghost story, imagine this. A paramedic finds a man curled up on the snow, holding a dog leash in one hand and an old Polaroid photo in the other. He's whispering the same words over and over. She saved me. She wouldn't let go. When they check the house behind him, there's no sign of anyone else alive. No footprints in or out. Just the dog's tracks, ending in the middle of the hallway. This is the story of Michael Grant. And the night a dog named Sadie gave everything to bring him home. Michael Grant hadn't been to Brookwood Falls, Oregon, in nearly 20 years. The little town in the mountains was where he'd spent every summer with his grandmother before she died. He remembered fishing in the creek, picking wild blackberries, and sleeping in the attic with his old beagle, Daisy. But the house was different now. Empty. Cold. And Michael was different too. A man freshly divorced, laid off, trying to outrun the shame of failing at everything he'd once loved. He arrived in early December, the first snow already blanketing the roof. His only companion was Sadie, a German shepherd he'd rescued from a shelter 2 years earlier. Sadie was smart, gentle, and fiercely protective. She was the only thing that made him feel like he still had family. The first nights were quiet enough to pretend nothing was wrong. Michael unpacked, fixed the leaking pipes, and tried to sleep in his grandmother's bed. But by the third night, Sadie began to pace. At first, he thought she heard coyotes, but she never barked at animals, only people. And every night, she would sit at the foot of the attic stairs, growling low. On the fifth night, he woke to find Sadie standing in the dark hallway, fur bristling, teeth bared. She was staring at the attic door. A cold draft moved across the floor as if the house was exhaling. Michael whispered, "Come back to bed." Sadie didn't budge. And then he heard it. A faint scratching sound overhead, slow and deliberate, like nails against old wood. The next morning, he decided to see what was up there. He climbed the narrow staircase, Sadie pressed to his side. The attic was exactly as he remembered. Dusty boxes, moth-eaten quilts, the little rocking chair by the window. But when he walked toward the far wall, he saw something new. A small door had been cut into the paneling. Rough, splintered edges. It hadn't been there when he was a boy. Sadie began to whine, low and mournful. Michael knelt, pressed his hand to the door. It was ice cold. And from the other side he heard it. 3 soft knocks. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a crate. Sadie lunged forward, teeth snapping at the wood as if she could tear through it to whatever waited behind. That night, he tried to pretend nothing had happened. He locked the attic door, piled furniture against it, and lit every lamp in the house. But as the hours passed, the wind picked up. The lamps flickered. And at 1:16 a.m., every bulb in the house went dark. In the pitch black, Michael fumbled for his flashlight. As soon as he switched it on, he heard a sound that turned his blood to ice. The attic door opening. Sadie was already moving. She bolted down the hallway, barking with a fury he'd never heard. Michael ran after her, light bouncing wildly. When he reached the stairs, he saw a shape moving in the dark. A tall, impossibly thin figure slipping down from the attic. Sadie lunged. The figure turned, and for one heartbeat, Michael saw a pale face with hollow black pits where eyes should have been. The light flickered. The thing vanished. But Sadie was gone too. Michael called her name over and over, voice cracking in the darkness. "Sadie, come!" No response. He swept the beam of the flashlight across the hallway. Nothing. He forced himself up the attic stairs, every step creaking under his weight. The small door in the paneling stood wide open. Inside was a crawl space he had never known existed. The air pouring from it was so cold it burned his skin. He aimed the light into the opening. It caught on something pale, like a hand, disappearing around the corner. Then he heard it. A whimper. Sadie's voice, but muffled, as if she were buried alive. Heart pounding, he crawled into the darkness. The passage was barely wide enough to fit his shoulders. Cobwebs clung to his face, and every inch forward felt like it was swallowing him whole. The walls were lined with old newspapers. Most were dated back to 1976, the year his grandmother had first moved into the house. But as he passed them, he realized they weren't just random clippings. They were all about children who had vanished. Names he didn't recognize, faces blurred by time. At the end of the passage, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. A single lantern sat on the floor, casting a weak yellow glow. And in that pool of light was Sadie. Her fur matted with dust, eyes wide, but alive. She didn't move. She was staring at the far wall, as if hypnotized. Michael crouched beside her and followed her gaze. Someone had painted words across the boards in thick black strokes. "We never left." Below the words were dozens of names, each written in a childish scrawl. He ran his fingers over the nearest one. It felt sticky, as if the paint had never dried. A cold dread crawled up his spine. Sadie whined, finally leaning her weight against him. He whispered, "We're going. Right now." But as he turned, he felt a pressure on his back, like invisible hands pushing him toward the wall. The lantern flickered, and then he heard them. Dozens of whispers, layered over each other in a chorus of dead children's voices. "Stay with us!" He lunged for Sadie's collar, dragging her away from the wall. The lantern tipped over, plunging them into darkness. As he scrambled back into the crawl space, something cold brushed his cheek. A hand. He didn't look back. He pulled Sadie behind him, feeling her claws scrabble over the boards. When they tumbled out into the attic, the small door slammed shut on its own. For a moment, the house went silent. Then a sound rose from behind the wall, like dozens of fingernails raking the boards in fury. Michael scooped Sadie into his arms and bolted down the stairs. They huddled together in the living room until dawn. Sadie wouldn't stop trembling. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he saw that wall of names. As the first gray light crept over the windowsills, he knew he couldn't stay another night. He had to get out, before whatever lived in that house decided it wanted him too. But when he checked the front door, the lock was jammed tight. No matter how he twisted the key, it wouldn't budge. Sadie stood beside him, her ears pinned flat, her eyes fixed on the stairs, as if she knew the house was not going to let them leave. That afternoon, Michael searched every inch of the house for another exit. He tried the windows, the cellar doors. Nothing moved. As the sun began to set, he found something wedged behind an old trunk in the guest room. A Polaroid photo, yellowed with age. It showed a young woman standing in front of the house, holding a little boy's hand. The woman looked exactly like his grandmother. But the boy wasn't Michael. And the dog sitting at their feet was a shepherd. Sadie's spitting image. On the back, someone had written in faded ink, "She always comes back for the ones she loves." That night, the blizzard began. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, burying the road in minutes. Michael moved room to room, trying the windows again, but the ice had sealed them shut. Sadie followed at his heels, never letting him out of her sight. Every hour or so, he would hear movement overhead. Footsteps pacing slowly in the attic. Occasionally, the scratching would start again, soft, rhythmic, like something trying to dig through the walls. By midnight, the power failed. The house plunged into darkness, so complete it felt like the end of the world. Michael lit the last candle he had and sat in the living room, holding Sadie's collar in one hand, the old Polaroid in the other. At 2:46 a.m., the temperature dropped so sharply, the candle's flame shrank to a blue pinprick. A voice called from the attic stairwell. "Michael." He squeezed his eyes shut. It was her voice again, his grandmother's. Calm, sweet, the way she'd sounded when he was a boy. "Michael, don't be afraid." Sadie growled, low and steady, pressing her body against his leg. The voice came again, closer now. "You remember how safe you were here, how much I loved you?" Michael's throat closed. Tears stung his eyes, because part of him wanted to believe it. To believe that maybe she was still watching over him. But Sadie's growl grew louder, vibrating against his knee. And then he understood. Whatever was in this house wasn't his grandmother. Slowly he turned the candle toward the doorway. A figure stood there, framed by the glow, tall, impossibly thin, draped in tattered black cloth. Where its face should have been, there was only a pale oval of skin stretched tight over bone. It began to move toward him, silent as snowfall. Sadie planted her feet, her hackles high. Michael felt her muscles coil. The figure paused, and in a voice that was no longer familiar, it whispered, "One of you must stay." Michael's voice came out ragged. "Stay for what?" No answer. The figure lifted one skeletal hand and pointed at Sadie. "She remembers." Michael swallowed hard. "What does she remember?" Again, the thing didn't answer. It simply glided back a step, dissolving into the dark. And then the scratching began again, this time on every wall, every floorboard, all at once. Sadie pressed closer to him, her body trembling, but her eyes never left the stairs. Michael clutched her by the collar. "We're leaving," he whispered, though he knew he didn't know how. At dawn, the storm broke. Gray light filled the kitchen. Michael tried the front door again. This time, it opened just a crack, enough for freezing wind to slap his face. He shouldered it wider, peering into the drifts. Snow came up to the windowsills. The road was gone. But there, in the middle of the yard, he saw something that made his chest clench. A path. Two parallel tracks, like something had been dragged out into the field behind the house. And at the end of the trail, half buried in snow, stood the attic door. As if it had been torn from the house and carried out there. Sadie whined softly, pressing her nose to the crack. Michael pulled on his boots and wrapped a blanket around Sadie. He knew staying inside meant waiting to die. The wind cut across his face as he stepped into the yard. The snow was so deep, he could barely walk. Each step was a battle. But Sadie stayed at his side, her eyes fixed on that door, half buried ahead. They reached it together. Up close, Michael saw something he hadn't noticed before. The door wasn't just resting in the snow. It had been jammed upright into the earth, like a gravestone. A single word was carved across the front in deep, crude letters. "Remember." He circled to the back, hand shaking, and pulled. The door swung open without resistance. Inside was a darkness deeper than any night. It was like looking into the mouth of a cave that had never known light. And in that dark, something moved. Sadie's fur bristled. She stepped forward, placing herself between Michael and the door. From the black, the voice came again. She remembers the promise. Michael's voice was hoarse. What promise? The first one. She came before. He looked down at Sadie. Her breath came in fast, shallow bursts. And he remembered the Polaroid. The dog at his grandmother's side. The same shepherd, a lifetime ago. The wind fell silent all at once, as if the world had stopped breathing. Then the voice spoke again. Layered, echoing from the trees, the snow, the ground itself. She stayed behind, so you could leave. Michael swallowed. His pulse thundered in his ears. And now, another must stay. Sadie turned her head, meeting his eyes. There was no fear there, only something like understanding, like acceptance. Michael sank to his knees. No, he whispered, voice breaking. I won't leave you. Sadie pressed her nose against his cheek. Then she stepped toward the doorway. Michael tried to grab her, but something invisible shoved him back. He fell hard into the snow, knocking the breath from his lungs. Sadie stood in the threshold, looking back one last time. The wind picked up again, swirling around her in a rising howl. And then she stepped inside. The darkness swallowed her completely. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the door shuddered and split down the middle, dissolving into black ash. The snow settled. The wind died. And the yard fell silent. Sadie was gone. Michael staggered back to the house, numb. The front door swung open easily now, as if nothing had ever held it shut. Inside, the lights flickered back on. The air warmed, and the scratching behind the walls was gone. He sank to the floor in the living room, the Polaroid clutched in his hand. The photograph that had seemed so old was different now. When he turned it over, new words were scrawled in fresh black ink. She kept her promise. By sunrise, Michael knew he couldn't stay in the house another moment. He packed what little he could carry into his truck. Before he left, he walked room to room, saying goodbye. Every corner felt emptier without Sadie's shadow beside him. When he stepped onto the porch, he turned back one last time. Snow drifted gently across the steps. The house looked almost peaceful. But he knew it wasn't peace. It was hunger, sated for now. He drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. 3 days later, Michael filed a missing dog report at the Brookwood Falls Sheriff's Office. The deputy who took his statement looked skeptical. You're telling me your dog disappeared into a door standing in the snow? Michael didn't bother trying to convince him. He simply handed over the Polaroid. When the deputy flipped it over, his face went pale. He read the words out loud. She kept her promise. He didn't ask any more questions after that. Months passed. Michael never went back to the house. He sold it to the county for $1, on the condition it would be condemned. But sometimes, late at night, he would take the Polaroid out of his wallet and trace the outline of the shepherd sitting beside the woman he never really knew. Sadie had never been just a pet. She had been something older, something braver. A guardian that never stopped watching over him. And in the end, she had kept her promise twice. Before you dismiss this as just a story about an old house or a haunted memory, consider this. We all carry ghosts. Some of them are memories. Some are regrets. Some are the things we love so fiercely that we would do anything to keep them close. Sadie was more than a dog. She was love made solid. Loyalty so strong it defied whatever darkness came for them. And sometimes, that's what saves us. Not courage, not strength, but a heart that refuses to let go, even when everything else does. So if you ever find yourself standing in a place that feels too dark to escape, remember this. The ones who love you most might not look like heroes. They might have 4 legs and a tail, or sit quietly beside you when you can't find the words. Sometimes, love is the only thing that can stand between you and the emptiness. And if you're lucky, you'll know it when you see it.